Good morning.
Good morning.
That gospel reading was something, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. You got people cutting off limbs and plucking out eyes and then throwing them into fire. Jesus calls us out for just having the thought to be angry with someone or to call them a fool, even if we don't act on it. Calls divorce a sin. He tells us not to swear oaths, and especially not to take oaths in the name of God. A simple yes or no will do. Now, just about everybody in this room knows how difficult this advice is to follow. And the answer to how difficult this advice is to follow is that it's basically impossible to do it all the time. It's impossible not to get angry or have bad thoughts. They sort of just happen. It's impossible to think about divorce as an entirely bad thing. And if you don't believe me, just ask someone who's left an abusive relationship and they got out of it by getting a divorce. They found new life after that, or we call it grace after divorce. And if you hold public office or you get called into court for reasons I don't want to know about, or you need to fill out certain kinds of official paperwork, chances are you have sworn an oath. And chances are they asked you to put your hand on a Bible while you did it, and you did it so help you God, even though Jesus says basically never to do this. Yes, this is one of those gospel passages here where Jesus has given us some hard teachings, so hard they can even seem discouraging. And then we got the images of the fire of hell, as we often translate the word, and they have taken on new kinds of meanings over the years that are different from the original meaning in Jesus' day and time. And some might be tempted to read this passage as a series of impossible rules to follow, and then when you don't, you get tossed into eternal torment with no hope. And I don't know about you all, but that doesn't sound much like good news to me. And that isn't the Jesus I know, who helps those who are hurting and heals the sick, who challenges authorities and places love and justice and forgiveness above all else. So you may be wondering just exactly what is going on here. And I think Jesus always gives us good news, and I believe him when he says that his ways are ones of love and mercy. And because of that, I think the Bible is actually getting us to push a little bit deeper into passages like this, that it's pressing on something much deeper than just the surface. It's something more profound than impossible rules or scare tactics. Jesus is not damning us here. Jesus is saving us here because that's what he came to do. And he does it by showing us our destructive behaviors and the motives behind them, and calling them for what they are, and calling on us to change our minds and change our ways. So in order to get a good handle on the meaning here, we got to remember that this reading comes just on the heels of the Beatitudes, where Jesus blesses those who suffer. It comes just on the heels of Jesus telling us to let our lights shine out, and calls us the salt of the earth. He blesses those whom society curses, and he tells us that we are precious children of God who carry that divine light into the world. And he tells us that if we want to find out about life on high, we got to look down low on society's list of important people. Those who are the least are the greatest. And Jesus has been talking about actions up until now. Now in today's reading, he makes a little bit of a turn and starts talking more about our motivations and our intentions. You see, these two things go hand in hand, your actions and your intentions. And if you want to live a gospel-based life, you have to remember that. Instead of just talking about murder, Jesus talks about the thing that leads to murder and violence, and that is malicious anger towards others and hate, where sometimes you forget that they're even people. Instead of just talking about adultery, Jesus talks about the feelings that lead us to be dishonest with others, the dishonest passions that inspire us to hurt our significant others by violating the terms of our relationships with them. And when he talks about divorce, he talks about what divorce was back in the day, which was usually a man dismissing an older woman that's been his wife for years and taking on a new one, leaving the older woman out in the cold. And that kind of separation puts somebody out. That's called abandonment. And that's just abusive. You see, Jesus here points to the seeds of emotion that grow into the trees of sinful actions. He says that if you really want to improve your life, you can't just stop doing the wrong kinds of things. You got to get a handle on the desires that inspire failure. Treating a sinful action alone is more like just treating a symptom and not getting at the actual root of the problem. Part of the problem is the motive. So what Jesus does here today is he holds up a mirror and asks us to take an honest look at our reflection in it. And I'll be the first to tell you it's sometimes hard to look in Jesus' mirror. You know, I think a lot of Christian churches need to take a look in Jesus' mirror. And I think they don't, and I think part of that is why young people are not only leaving the church, but finding the very concept of being a Christian immoral. In a recent study that came out, well, it was a couple years ago, but it's still relevant, it said that young people overwhelmingly see Christians as a group as hypocritical, hateful, sexist, homophobic, and manipulative. And I gotta say, sometimes it's hard to argue with that. You just look at the stories that you see in the news about how some Christians behave. Members of the Church Universal that pick on women and gay people and turn their backs on the poor and on people who are fleeing terror in their own countries, and they argue until they're blue in the face over abortion while plenty of children already with us starve and suffer from a lack of education and are forced into gang involvement before they even leave elementary school. What's more, many Christians are now seeking to influence the political process in unfair ways, not just by standing up for justice and putting down the oppression that causes people to suffer. They want to endorse particular political candidates officially as a church, and they want to keep their tax-exempt status while caving into the partisan divide. In short, they want to sell out. Lord have mercy. And we look in Jesus' mirror, and sometimes what we see is a sin-sick soul. And it's helpful for us to remember that the Episcopal Church defines a sin as anything that damages your relationship with God, with others, or with creation. Anything that's damaging spiritual or relationally. And we betray the gospel of Jesus Christ when we go into business with a kill or be killed attitude, or when we look at the troubles of others as not our problem. Spiritual and physical destruction come in the forms of abuse of addiction, deceitfulness, self-righteousness, greed, arrogance, vanity. The list goes on and on and on. What I mean to say here is that we need to look and see in Jesus' mirror. We need to look and see the things in life that we are abusing or that are controlling us and that are destroying ourselves in the process. These things are addictive, and maybe they feel good, but they're no way to live, constantly chasing a high or a feeling of superiority or the illusion of total control. We go after them because we think that they enhance life, but the irony here is that they bring with them destruction and death. And this is why Jesus uses the strong image of cutting off a hand or gouging out an eye, because getting rid of those ways, getting rid of those impulses is not an easy thing to do. In fact, it hurts. It hurts to give up the old habits of arrogance, manipulation, selfishness, and decadent pleasure. But what Jesus is commanding us to this morning is to be rid of them. Not let them control who we are and our destinies, because if we don't, we'll destroy our own selves by our own misguided hands and passions. What we'll end up with is a big pile of garbage where life abundant should have been. And that's important because the image here that Jesus gives us of what happens with that garbage, we translate it as hell. It's translated as hell in the gospel we read today. The original word is Gehenna. That's the word he said to people when he talked to them. And Gehenna was an old valley around Jerusalem where they dumped garbage and sewage and corpses, and they set the waste on fire in order to be rid of it. And at that time, it became a great symbol for spiritual and physical decay and destruction. So basically, Jesus is warning us here That if we don't look into his mirror and take stock of our own sins, of those things that hurt us spiritually and hurt those around us, then we're destined to a future that's no better than a valley of burning garbage. That's a pretty terrifying prospect. It's a warning about the consequences of neglecting God and abusing ourselves and others. It sounds rough, but you know what? Sometimes that's where salvation lies. And we must remember that Jesus came to bring life, not death. And so he points to these things and he tells us to try to sever those ties with those things that destroy us, those part of ourselves inside that bring us down, so that we may have life and we may have it abundantly. We ought to see ourselves as children of God and made in God's own image, destined to live lives of love, charity, and kindness, and hope. We're not people to be tossed into a rubbish pile. No one is, not even the least of us. And if we believe Jesus, especially not the least of us. And it's so crucial for us to take this in and believe it and live it out, because our peers and our children, young people and people outside the Christian faith, they look at Christians and see what we do. They see how our actions and our habits form us and how our orientation towards the gospel changes us as people. So why do we make those painful departures from behaviors that are destroying our lives and make God a part of our everyday life? We do it so that our children and our children's children might grow up in the knowledge and love of God and Christ Jesus, the one who saves us from lives of burning garbage. We turn from spiritual and physical desolation and embrace God so that divine glory might shine through us and bring people to the church and to the way of Christ. We come together to grow in God so that we may in turn go out into the world and preach the gospel. And let me quote St. Francis here when I say that we ought to preach the gospel at all times, using words when necessary. And we have to be ready to depart from the ways of destruction and embrace the good ways of life which God has given that makes our relationships better, not damage them. And now, none of us in this room can claim perfection, nor shall we, at least on this side of heaven. But this must not keep us from opening ourselves to God so that God's kingdom may grow from within us and into our churches and from beyond our churches and into the world. Amen.
Amen.